This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. Welcome to the Wagon Wheel podcast. I am Jarrod Kimber, and I always am. I remain that person. This is the podcast where we answer questions from you. Well, I mean, it may not be from you specifically, but it will be from people who have supported us on Patreon, or those of which who have sent in a super chat. We already have a super chat as well, so someone's ahead of the game today. We don't have as many questions on Patreon for this particular episode, so if you are on YouTube and you're watching this live, feel free to get a super chat in. And if you can't afford a super chat, just put a normal one in, and you never know what will take my fancy, because I don't know what will take my fancy. But if you desperately want to get your questions involved, then obviously Patreon is the best way. And it's also, well, super chats are absolutely fantastic, and I thank everyone for them. The reason Patreon really works is because it allows me to budget and plan new shows and do everything else. Whereas super chats, sometimes we get a lot of them and sometimes we don't. But now onto the show. Nadika says, will the baseball shuffle and the amount batters move around the crease in white ball games encourage cricket to find and develop specialist keepers again? It's a really good question, Nadika. I remember I wrote this huge article, and I don't know how many wicket keepers I talked to, but a metric shit ton of wicket keepers quite a few years ago. And wrote the article. It was called Point Fielders with Gloves On. It's on Cricket Info. I don't know if we've ever done it as a video or as a podcast. But it was something that I was really desperate to get to and to tell the story of how wicket keeping had changed. And I said that in it, I thought what we would need would be something bigger. If Adam Gilchrist had a small impact on cricket. And when you have a look at it, you can see that batting was already starting to take over before Gilchrist. Not that he didn't have an impact because of, the way that he specifically scored so quickly. But, Alex Stewart and many other, Ian Gunnar-Gould and all the way back to the 1960s, England were trying, with Jim Parks were trying this. And so if Gilchrist had a little impact, I would have thought that the reversal impact would have to be much bigger. I would still think it would need to be more analytics based, as in, we can now say with good certainty that this kind of keeper is worth 15 runs to your team, and this kind of keeper is worth 2 runs to your team. Because of that, I do think there is I think it would be harder to say, just based on the baseball shuffle and what's happening in the white ball game, that a great wicket keeper can have an impact. What would be really interesting for me, and I think this has to happen in the 3 main countries. I'm going to explain why in a moment. But what would be really interesting to me is if you suddenly had a host of wicket keepers keeping up to the stumps to people 85 to 90 miles an hour in a major market like India, Australia, or England, who were starting to be successful en masse. And if that then comes to the point of which everyone says, well, wait a minute here. In certain situations, the caught behind is no longer the most important dismissal. In fact, I haven't had a look if caught behind has gone down in the wobble ball era. But in the wobble ball era, you are attacking the stumps a lot more than you ever did before. So it would be interesting to see if that those two things actually match up there. But the point being is, if you did have a bunch of those 85 to 90 mile an hour balls in a bigger market, with the keeper up the stumps, is that the sort of big bang we needed? Because I thought before what we really needed was the spatial tracking or analysis to make things change. But you do make a point, that we are having such a what's the term everyone likes? Disruptors in the way that everyone's batting at the moment. We've already seen, Blundell and who else? Carey. Bairstow do it a little bit as well. Bairstow perhaps a little bit as well. Come up to the stumps in situations that never normally would. Well, if that continues, right, and it ends up being what the game is now, well, if that's the case, then you might be right, and it's a really fascinating one. Will says, what odds would you give on Ben Stokes playing the first test against India? I would assume he would play the first test against India. I think his problem is more a degenerative. Well, we don't know exactly, so I'm guessing, but I think it's more of a it's an impact thing from bowling. So his batting, he should be able to bat in that situation, but he was going to use this period to get himself right. What I suppose what I would say is something slightly different there, although I understand your point. I think what I would say, Will, is that how many fewer test matches or even years will Ben Stokes have if he continues to play on a knee that clearly needs a operation and needs recuperation for this period? Their original decision was clearly going to be, we will take we will let him retire. He will come back for the World Cup, but his knee hasn't got a lot better in that time. And so I do think that there's a lot of risk in this situation. And I understand why people are. I understand why he's doing it, but I wonder if it's the best use of Ben Stokes, and maybe they think it is. Anthony says, you mentioned in the past how the speed of the bowler can quite often determine the amount of swing they can produce. So if you bowl at 120 kilometer hours rather than 140, you would get more swing. That is what I said, Anthony. You smashed it. As Cummins, Stark, and Hazelwood get a bit older, I wonder whether they are becoming less impactful with the moving ball as they lose their pace because of age and drift into that middle zone of less swing. I feel like they ought to have produced more movement during the Ashes when conditions didn't favour them. So the most important thing to remember is outside of Stark, and we are really talking about Stark with a new ball, not one of those is a swing bowler anymore, right? Swing bowling almost doesn't exist at test level at the moment. Is there a bowler who is consistent swing bowler? Yeah, it really doesn't exist anymore, Anthony. So, what has happened is the wobble ball has taken over. People are trying to seam the ball around a little bit. And what you see with the wobble ball is kind of what you've seen at the end here, where you said that they weren't providing as much movement. The reason was that it wasn't a particularly, we heard Jimmy Anderson talk about this, but it wasn't a particularly great wobble ball summer. The only person I saw who really got the ball to jag around consistently was probably Scott Poland. He didn't take any wickets, but I think he just gets to move a little bit more. So what you do see with a wobble ball is, and if you go back, so I don't know how old you are, Anthony, but let's say you're old enough to remember Richard Hadley or Damien Fleming or Matthew Hoggart, right? Even early Tim Southey and early Jimmy Anderson were certainly feeling in this. If you watch those guys, they would be swinging the ball quite prodigiously. So when you're watching on TV, it is obvious that the ball is moving. Was it Makram, right? It is obvious that the ball is moving around everywhere. When you're watching the wobble ball, you are actually watching something far different. You're watching a lot of straight deliveries with occasional movement. That is very, very tough for a batter to play, right? Because also what we see as a straight delivery often isn't very straight. So what our eye sees as dead straight when you go back on the replay or you look at the Hawkeye data is actually just a little bit of movement, right? And so it is a tougher thing to be able to play from that perspective, but it doesn't look like outswing. Outswing hoops and moves, and in swing drifts in, and you get these big patterns, and it's really obvious, especially to people who don't watch as much cricket. What you could argue is that the Australian bowlers could have tried more conventional swing. I'm not sure Hazelwood really is a swing bowler or ever has been. Stark is a swing bowler in that the ball swings from his hand, but he's not a highly skilled swing bowler who can get the ball to swing for long periods of time. But if you did watch this series, there were at least 2, maybe 3 spells when Cummins just started bowling swing. And it was because they didn't think the ball was doing anything off the seam. So I don't think it has anything to do with their pace. I think it's the kind of bowlers they are now. Manon says, which eras do you think were relatively batting and bowling friendly compared to other eras? How do you figure out adjusted stats? I remember you talking about that, something like that earlier. So best batting eras are 1930s, 1940s. 1950s is kind of shit for everyone, but I suppose is a bowler-led era, if we're being honest. And then your next bowler-led era starts in the 70s, I want to say. 70s through to about 2000. It's quite bowler dominant. And then 2000 to 2016 is probably the greatest batting era there has ever been in Test cricket. And then it becomes quite bowler friendly, the next 6 years after that, 7 years after that, whatever that may be. So those are the key. Oh, and then of course anything before, you almost say 1910, but certainly 1900 is very bowler dominated. So what you're looking for really is, and it doesn't matter if it's bowling dominated or batting dominated. What you're really looking for is if everyone's playing in these conditions, and there's a reason for it. There's no liquid manure, so the pitches aren't very good, or the fast bowling. I don't even know. The pitches are made to fall apart. So we if you look at the late 70s to 2000, we probably have the first time where we have wickets that are being covered for the first time, and they seem to have not everywhere, but pretty much throughout the entire game, they seem to be a little bit more focused on results and crumbling towards the end of games. You don't see as many wickets that fall apart in a way that certainly did in India and Australia in the 90s quite often had wickets where it was impossible to bat at the end. The West Indies had wickets where it was impossible to bat at the end. We don't have as many of those anymore. And so that was a big part of probably 2000 to 2016. So let's say you bat let's say you are Kumar Sangakkara and you basically bat in the sweet spot, right? And we're comparing Kumar Sangakkara to Viv Richards, who batted pretty much throughout a tougher era, almost all the way through. What you then do is you look at all the other batters and you look at their record compared to all the other top order batters, and straight away you'll be able to tell if there's something special. So the player that I'm aware of, because we've done some of the, me and Cheyenne have done some of this work already, is Javed Miandad, right? You go back and you have a look. Javed Miandad suddenly starts looking like one of the best players of all time when you start to factor in that. Now, there's many other things, of course, that you need to look at, but that's essentially what you're looking at. And you're not looking for specifically, I think someone else did this recently where they looked at the averages. So they adjusted the averages for era. I think it was for era they did. I might have got that wrong, but I think that's what they did. Or they did it for the test matches that people played in. It was one or the other. I think you should do both, by the way. But I think it's actually better to look at, the relative, So if you're in an era where everyone averages, all the top order players average 35 and you average 45, and someone else is in an era where all the top order players average 40 and they average 48. It's not just about the difference in average, right? It is, the difference in percentage and everything else. So that's kind of what we're looking at with those sorts of things. So we get a better idea, and we're very early on with those numbers, and we'll eventually try and make them public for everyone. And obviously they'll be in a book. They'll be on a podcast series, probably a couple of podcast series. They'll be on the YouTube page and everywhere else. But that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a point of where we have the most information to be able to tell you about a player. Home versus away, their record in the test matches they played. The records of other players who played the same role at that stage. All these sorts of things that we're looking at to work out who are the best players of all time. Vivek says, let's assume that you're part of the Aussie setup in the recent Ashes. That's a big assumption. I suppose I know some of the guys there. It's almost impossible, but not completely impossible. What kind of plans would you lay out for the batters to counter England's constantly changing plans and their ability to chip away at the opposition wickets? This is a really good question, Vivek. I think the first thing I would do is I think I would have made it really clear to them coming in that is England's superpower. That the new ball is obviously because of Anderson and Broad where they are most famous, but their main superpower has been, especially at home, is just that ability to continue to get wickets. And so then what I would have done is I would have shown them how quickly England change each one of those plans. Because I think if they knew that coming in, that there were times when they were facing all those bounces, at Lords. I really don't think England would have bowled as many bounces if Australia had just not gone out to them, right? So Australia were when Australia went in with a plan, whether it was bowling spin to the long boundary or bowling the short ball or trying to get Cummins to swing it, they would usually go in it for a very long time, whereas England don't do that. So you do have the ability then to go, okay, we think these are their 8 main plans in this middle period. If you can get to the point where they're cycling through them really quickly, and you have, before you go out there, you have your counter to that plan already set up. Now, there's always going to be changes because the wickets are going to dictate certain things, and they might try something else that they haven't tried before. But I think if you know that England are going to keep changing those plans, if you go back to the Usman Khawaja 100 at Edgbaston, where when Khawaja is batting and they put that ring field around him, he starts to bat in a way where he's like, are they going to do this forever, right? They're going to just bowl with this field forever, and how am I going to score for a long period of time? Whereas if you would have told him, they're probably going to try that for 6 overs, right? And at most, it's going to be 12 overs. Are you willing not to score for 12 overs to save your wicket? And he'd probably go, oh, yeah. And they're going to make a couple of mistakes at that time, so you still will score a little bit. Chances are you're not going to score nothing, right? I think if that's the case, it's a much easier thing to do. But just knowing what all those plans are so that you have all those counters beforehand, I think is really, really important. The Usman, I just said one. That's one that doesn't come up very often, right? But from that point in the series, they did try that 2 or 3 times afterwards. I have seen them do it in India before. Maybe you don't have a plan for something like that. But in that case, what you might have said is they're not going to do it forever. And I think that's a really important thing. And I do think what England are doing is playing on the fact that players have a different kind of patience now than they used to have. So I think if you did that, Usman Khawaja is a defensive batter, but I think if you did that to a defensive batter from the 80s or 90s, I think they would have just gone, okay, well, he probably can't get me out if I just defend for a couple of overs here. And eventually he might get bored, and if he bowls too straight, I'll flick him away. And if he bowls really wide, gives me a good amount of width, I can play this shot. But if not, I'm not going to try and drive because I might get caught by one of these fielders. And if I try and manufacture anything, I bring him into the game. And I do think that, knowing that, it's a bit like, it's a really weird analogy, but Vivek, when you are walking to something and you never walked there before and your phone says 13 minutes, feels like a really long walk. But when you're walking home, quite often feels like a short walk because you know the entire journey. And I think that's the difference that I think the batters need to know when going in against England. Satchmo says, how close are England to becoming the world's best test side? Probably an Indian tour away. I mean, it has to work in Asia and it has to work in proper Asian conditions. So if you say, well, it worked in Pakistan, I'm not sure what the Pakistan conditions were. They're probably Pakistani conditions, not even Asian conditions. But it has to be able to work against, Ashwin and Jadeja, because that's the other team that you have to dethrone, right? We've just seen Australia play a good series in India, and lose that 2-1. If England go over and lose 3-0, but if it even gets to the point where they can take a test off India, which very few teams have, and then they continue to dominate everywhere else, I think that's fine. If they lose to India really, really poorly, but India hit a bit of a skids as well, and England blitz everywhere else, then again, they have that available to them. So, age curve might be as much of an issue as anything else. They've already lost Broad. They might lose Anderson very soon. The next crop of bowlers are, not on that level. Let's just be honest. And if Jofra doesn't come back, that is an issue for them. And Menon says, I feel like Boult is underrated. Kind of elite in every format. One of this generation's greatest. Yeah, I don't think he's underrated. I just think he's a New Zealander. So, there is a part of Bolt's career that is, you have to take the fact that he's not from a major market. He's probably not as sexy as, I don't know, Shane Bond either, or Kyle Jameson, right? They're maybe a little bit more obvious in what they do than Boult. The other thing I would say about Boult is he absolutely dominated the period when no one was taking any wickets. And I think he was getting a really good reputation at that point and was going, towards all-time great status, right? He doesn't pick the wobble ball up. He continues to bowl the exact same way, and he continues to take wickets at a very similar record. Yeah, His wobble ball is very recent. He's still not completely on top of it. He bowls the 3/4 one. He doesn't bowl the traditional wobble ball as much, although I think he's been working on it. And I do think that he doesn't have the drop-off that everyone else does. So when suddenly Ishan Sharma is taking wickets at a better average than you, and Kemar Roach is taking wickets at a better average than you, and Suranga Lakmal has a similar average, I do think that hurt him. And because of that, I don't think he got the boost that he should have. But I think it's a fair question. I don't think he's a great T20 bowler either. I know he has had success, and as obviously, Mumbai have liked him, but he's not Bumrah or Stark or that's even he's not even a Rabada like level T20 bowler. I think he's that level just below those players. But no, he's absolutely fantastic. And, he's also, it is worth pointing out just what a brilliant fielder he is. I know he's kind of famous for one of the biggest fielding errors of all time, but he's an absolutely sensational fielder, just such a great mover for someone his size, but also as a bowler in general. All right, let's take a break. And then after the break, I will come back with quite a few more of your questions from Patreon.
A little bit of grass on the wicket is good, but too much and all hell breaks loose. Not enough and things can go sideways very quick. The same is true of your pubic hair. And you don't have a groundsman who smells like fertilizer telling you what to do. No, you are the curator of your own pubic pitch. So if you're having trouble grooming your pitch, what about Manscaped? They've invented a sleek, well-designed, optimized trimmer that helps you shave your balls. I've used it, and it's incredible. It's good enough to use at Lord's. So get 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code REDINKA. And you just put that in at manscaped.com. That's 20% off, free worldwide shipping, manscaped.com. The code is REDINKA. I always thought this podcast took balls more seriously than anyone else. Then I tried Manscaped.
All right. Will says, where are we here? You mentioned in the last Wagon Wheel that you believe that many old speed guns were inaccurate. Who do you believe was the fastest bowler ever? And who do you think it would have been if they had modern sports science available to them? Oh, okay. Well, that's really interesting. That takes me on a few different levels there. I do think they're inaccurate. I think they're inaccurate when we first got Tomo tested in, what was it, 77, 78. But I think that data still gives us really good information, as does the speed guns in the 90s into the 2000s. I think that sort of Hawkeye level tracking is probably a lot more accurate. Not that there aren't outliers. The Hawkeye system gets bugs in it and everything else. All these things happen as well. But it is more accurate, I think, now than it has been before. Who do I think is the fastest bowler ever? I think of individual balls. I would still think that Sean Tate or Shoaib Akhtar is probably slightly faster than Mark Wood or Anrik Nortje. But if you're looking at sustained pace over a 6 or 8 over spell, I certainly think that Anrik Nortje and Mark Wood are faster than Tate or Shoaib Akhtar. I think there are certainly some. I would love to see every bowler tested. I've said this before, so I'm not when I pick out Akhtar and Lee and Tate, I don't want to say that they were chuckers, because the way that other people say that is not the way that I use it. Chucking is a no ball and should be called as a no ball. But I do think that every single bowler in the world should be tested for their action. And I would love to have gone back and seen what their actions were. I've certainly seen balls from... I saw a Shoaib Akhtar ball recently where it just looks like he's throwing it. And I don't think he did that all the time. And I've seen many other balls where I haven't thought he was throwing it. And I know there was persistent rumors in Australia about Brett Lee chucking the ball. Again, I've seen some balls where I'm like, oh, that was interesting. But I don't think he was a persistent chucker either. And with Sean Tate, same sort of rumors for both of those two on a slightly lesser level. So there was also the fact that we know that Shoaib Akhtar took performance-enhancing steroids, or was suspended for it, or whatever the case may be. So I don't want to say that those three, because I think those are the three obvious guys that weren't. They might still be quicker than Anrik Nortje or Mark Wood, but I think that consistently, when you factor in everything, I think that these are the two quickest bowlers of all time. If you're asking me with sports science and everyone else, I suppose Uh, I suppose Tomo would have been really interesting if he'd had, access to, peak Cricket Australia or England cricket stuff. Would they have even, we know he injured his shoulder. Maybe when he was getting towards peak, speed. I think there are a lot of bowlers who probably bowled really, really quickly when they were young, and then when they got older, struggled to keep that kind of speed up. Whereas now we're seeing older bowlers bowling at ridiculous paces, and that has to be the modern sports science stuff that you were talking about available to them. So I do think from that perspective that you have, I think from that perspective, it would have been interesting. I mean, maybe the Tomo injury doesn't help, but Patrick Patterson is another one who I would have thought was not that much slower than Tomo. I would have thought that Patrick Patterson. I think I've said before. I think he bowled probably around that Pat Cummins 93, 94 miles an hour, but he did that kind of naturally. I know they had a really good physio, but that's all they had, right? They had a really good physio who was good at strength and conditioning. You can't compare that to what Mark Wood has behind him, right? Or what Jofra Archer has behind him, or what Anrik Nortje has behind him. All the sports science, all the information that we have now that we didn't know back then. So yeah, I do think I would love to, and that's why the guns weren't very good. I don't think it was. I don't think the actions. It was in that middle period after Murali where I don't think that the ICC took chucking actions very seriously. But even if they did, I don't think any of those three fast bowlers I mentioned before were throwers. What I do think is that occasionally, and this happens to every fast bowler in the world, right? Almost every seam bowler who's trying to bowl towards the upper level of their pace will occasionally throw the ball. The same with almost every off spinner or finger spinner at one stage occasionally throws it. So I don't want it to be, it's called Shoaib Akhtar and Brett Lee and Sean Tate chuckers, because that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that there have been, at different times in cricket, different ways that we have looked at players. And, I think different kinds of actions that have come through that have been allowed to, not be scientifically tested as much. And then the other thing I would say is even the tests, whether it was Murali or random off spinners who, went through all those tests, Shane Shillingford and Syed Ajmal and all those sorts of players who went through those tests. Even when you test them, we're still not really testing them properly when we test them in the lab. The only way to test all these bowlers would be to have something on their arm, which means that when you do bend it slightly too much during a game, it's just no ball. There's no stigma there, and we move on. So all that sort of stuff is what I would like, and we can't get that. We have nothing on. Charlie Griffith, I think, might have been called once or twice. I'm not even sure if he was, but he was probably the fastest bowler in the world for quite a period of time, and had persistent rumors about him being called for chucking. I'm not sure if Tomo had those rumors because his action was kind of more like a catapult, right? Like I'm not even sure he could have chucked, which I kind of thought at times. For Malinga had a lot of rumors about him chucking, and I look, watching Malinga bowl, I wasn't sure that he could have chucked. But the point is that there's all these different variables. Well, when you bring this up, I still think that all things considered, Wood and Nortje I mean, if you're looking at, and I think there's a big difference between peak delivery pace and consistent pace. But I think all things considered, that Wood and Nortje are the two that I feel that I have seen the most of, that if I threw them a ball at any stage in the day, no matter how many balls they bowled, and asked them to bowl 90 miles an hour, that they would have that ability when they were fully fit. Whereas I'm not sure that it was the case of those other bowlers. Peak balls, I think Shoaib Akhtar and Sean Tate are the two fastest I have seen, and obviously Tomo was incredible as well. But I don't think they had that same level of consistency day after day. And they didn't have to as well. They weren't always being monitored, and people weren't always around. Like, things have changed quite a bit. Niran says, considering DDS, Dhananjaya de Silva, to you normies, has the best batting average for number 6 since 2015. 11th best of all time, 1,000 runs. This is great, Niran. I think like I could see you actually trying to goad me into writing the big DDS piece that I was born to make. Would it be good enough in the conversation for a World 11 spot amongst current players? Is batting skills enough, or does the number 6 batter have to be a good all-rounder like Stokes or Green? I think if you're doing a World 11, you definitely want an all-rounder in that position, or someone with all-round skills, as you said, like a wicket-keeper. There's no way... No one can love DDS more than me. And when you see the video, I'll try and make the counter argument to this. But there's no way that you would pick DDS over Jadeja, right? And then you also mentioned Rishabh Pant. I suppose you could put Bairstow in there as well. I'm trying to think of anyone else. Blundell would be, potentially another one. Then you've got Holder, Green, all these sorts of players. They're all of more used to DDS, right? If his bowling was slightly better, and especially was available to be used in other places, he would go. But that's not taking anything away, because I think they're looking at it from the perspective that he gives them at the very least, he gives them a very good part-time option, right? And they know that they can't really bat him any higher. He doesn't really have the skills to bat top 3 or top 4. So he has to bat kind of at 5 or 6. And he's nailing it, right? If they had better options available, or he was slightly more skilled in another way, like he could bat it even 5 consistently, or certainly 4, he would be of much more use to them as a team. But he's been given this job and he's nailed it. I always thought that the reason that he didn't have a better record all around, because you looked at his individual skills and you're like, there's so much here to work with. But even as a T20 player, like, he would bat down the order, whereas actually as a T20 player, his best use was probably scoring at a strike rate of 135 to 145, averaging 28 to 35, and then giving you 2 overs every innings while being a plus fielder, and a massively plus fielder, let's be honest. Fantastic fielder. And you would watch him in T20 cricket and he wasn't being used that way, right? And it's the same in Test cricket. I think they batted him at 3 for a while, didn't they? Am I misremembering that? He was certainly way too high up the order, and it's like, and I remember when England were trying to use Sam Curran as their opening bowler, and Mike Selvey saying, he's so talented, but you've got to use him in the right way. And his best role is probably not going to be opening and bowling in Test match cricket, right? And it's a bit the same with DDS. Those sorts of players, they're not all-time greats, but they have a very specific, I almost went Liam Neeson then, didn't I? Their skills are very particular, and the way you use them has to be very particular if you want to get the most out of them. And I think in a team like Sri Lanka, you just have to do that. Will says, how do you rate Brook currently, and can he be one of the best in the world, and how do you think he will fare in India? Yeah, I feel like he was slightly overhyped, then he was slightly, thrown away too early, and we're in this middle period with him. I worry that he hasn't had a moment to work out his best way of using his attacking skills to allow him safe runs in the way that Stokes is brilliant at this, right? And if you go back, the sort of the famous, people like Hayden and those sorts of players were just really good at using their power and their attacking instincts to set the field up in a way that they could just score for a while and go into cruise mode. And then when they wanted to up it up into, the 5th and 6th gear, they would do that, and they were very hard to stop. And I think that at the moment, that's one thing, especially in Test cricket, that I wonder whether, because that's really what you want to do. You can't constantly attack in Test cricket in the way that you do in a T20 game, because in a T20 game, you're not going to end up averaging 50. And in a Test match, you're probably going to want to average 40 plus over a long period of time. And it's very hard to do in T20 cricket or even one-day cricket while you're, attacking at those certain periods. So really what you want to do is if you look at Victor Trumper and you go back to the original guy, what was he doing? He was basically hitting the ball to the leg side to move fielders from the offside to allow him to then score easier on the offside when he had to. So now he can score on both sides of the wicket, right? And if you go to, the great attacking players, that's kind of what they're trying to do. Like Gilchrist, for instance, he had big periods where he would hit a lot of fours. They would then put a lot of fielders out, and then he would milk that for a little while. And then when he needed to, he would go up into that other gear. Brook can do that at a higher strike rate. Like, I think that's where the game has just moved. So he can have an even higher strike rate than Gilchrist. But I don't think what he can do is what I've seen at times where he's attacking for attacking's sake, because he's been given this full license, which is fine. But I've said that the baseball kind of works best when you're playing it in a middle overs one day style, which is I'm going to take calculated risks to move the field to where I want it, to make sure this bowler can't bowl again and all that sort of stuff. If you're just attacking, I do think you're opening yourself up to a lot of silly dismissals. That's my biggest concern for Brook. The other one is I just don't know how good a player he is of spin. I'm just going to need to see more of him against, really high quality spinners over a period of time. And he's about to go up against 2, well, maybe 3, maybe 4 absolutely fantastic spinners in India, right? And so we're going to learn a lot about him in a very short period of time. But that one, I haven't done the research to be able to tell you on that one. Aditya says, which of the ILT20 and MLC are likely to survive and thrive in the long term? I would say the MLC, because they have more money. They have an infrastructure of having grounds that people are, coming to watch games. There is an audience at the ground, so it doesn't look bad when you watch it on TV. There are very, very rich people who are motivated to keep it going. And it has a market, whereas the ILT20, it's there, but I don't see how it's ever going to make a lot of money. If it ends up being a feeder league and a development league, then it's still got a lot of use to the owners. But that's nothing compared to another league that can actually make you money. Like, the people who are investing in the ILT20 are not saying to me, we expect to end up as, I don't know any of these teams. Is it the LA Galaxy? They're not expecting to be the LA Galaxy or the Miami FC. Is it Miami FC? Real Miami, whatever they're called. Whereas the people in Major League Cricket are thinking that is a possibility. So the ceilings on the two is wildly different. What I would say is, because so much money is being spent on I don't know which one I'm doing here, but so much money is being spent on the Major League Cricket, I think the floor is lower and the ceiling is higher. Whereas ILT20 could probably keep going at maybe a steady rate. So perhaps you could argue in that case. Then it depends on what you mean by thrive, because then you have to kind of work out what you mean. But survive, okay, let's do it this way. I think the ILT20 is more likely to survive, and I think the MLC is more likely to thrive. Probably could have started there. Ben says, if a new T20 franchise was formed, 100 and Blast are both scrapped to make a fresh competition, could teams consider picking players only on potential and not really caring about results for the first year or two, with the gamble that they'll be unstoppable and a dynasty when these players mature? Okay, so the first thing about that is, if you look at football or American sports or even rugby, right? These sports have a really, really well-developed talent pathway system. We have the Under-19 World Cup. Do we have anything else? Really? I would argue that we don't know that much about young cricketers coming through. There are very few people keeping data on any of these cricketers. They don't play a lot of age group cricket. The ones that break through into senior ranks at a young age, yeah, you have a little bit more information, but it is tricky. Having said all that, when I was running St. Lucia, my plan was essentially that we had Karen Pollard under contract, and we had Rakeem Cornwall, and we had Odean Smith that we could offer contracts to again, and we had Chandrapal Hemraj available to us, someone like Kavim Hodge. So I thought, what we have is a senior, well-respected captain. And then we had a bunch of other players that could fit in. So I then started making phone calls, and I basically put out a dream list of, Puran, Hetmeyer, Rodman Powell. Who else did I have on that list? I'd have to go back and have a look at it. Oh, we had Obed McCoy as well already. So we had Obed McCoy, but I think there was another young bowler I was looking at. And I was just like, and I was literally, what I wanted to do is say to all these guys, if you all come over, right, you guys will have a team that is completely separate to the previous generation outside of Kieron Pollard. And I think while this was happening, perhaps Kieron Pollard had already decided he was going to Trinidad, which meant that I could even say, so I had the conversation with Robin Powell's, agent that, you can come over and captain this team and be part of the building process. And this is what I want to do. I'd talk to a bunch of, Chima Holder, Mel Lewis, the young St. Lucia player. I did proper stuff when I met Mel Lewis's family and all that sort of stuff, because I thought that was the best way of doing it. I don't know if Seals was another one I might have had on my list. And there's a couple of others that I had on my list that didn't go anywhere, right? And that's the danger of that, because there's so little information about these guys. But that was the plan of, can you build this team up with a bunch of people who, you would have paid Puran and Hetmeyer top money. You would have bumped Rakeem Cornwall up to a slightly higher rate. You would have made sure that you had Odian and Obed on long-term contracts, over a couple of years. All these sorts of things that you could have done. It is possible, but I was taking a lot of risks with players that, I think some of the players I probably, wanted, I can't even remember some of the other ones, but they didn't do anything, right? And they didn't become anything. But I did think that this was a way that you could do it. The reason that most people don't do it is quite simply because most of these leagues have a major draft after every 4 years. So I happen to be there at a point when we were about to start that cycle of 4 years. And there was a bunch of guys I already knew who were between the age of 21 and 23, say, who were going to get better, even if we didn't do anything good with them. The vast majority, as a unit, 4 or 5 of those were going to get better. And so that is what stops a lot of teams from doing this. So let's say you get, let's say you do what Delhi did. Delhi ended up losing a lot of those younger players because by the time they got good, they couldn't keep them all, right? And now they're looking at their next younger players at that point as well. It's a really tricky situation. So a lot of it is how those things happen. I would still argue it's the better plan, because what I was saying at the time to the ownership was, okay, but we're going to have Rakeem Cornwall at 28, and we're going to have Odian Smith at 24, and Obed McCoy at 25, and Puran or Hetmeyer at whatever they were going to be, 26, 27, 28 at the same stage. We could just pick the best 4 of those. We're still in a better position than any, or 3, or how many other people you could keep. We're still in a better position than anyone else. And it also, I think it makes more sense, but it doesn't seem to be how franchises are willing to take that risk at the moment. Aditya says, during your research on Mankad, did you find any pieces of Capel Dev trying to run out Peter Kirsten in 1992? I did not. I did not hear that, but there are a lot of, when you go through, I know the Courtney Walsh one is obviously a very famous one, but there are a lot of occasions when batters were out of their crease and the bowler just looked at them. We know Mitchell Stark is a recent one, right? When the bowlers just looked at them as if to say, what are you doing here? Right? Please stop doing this. I've heard rumors of arguments between players off the field as well, where the bowlers go onto the batter and go, do you want me to run you out? Like, is that what you're doing here? Like, why can't you just stay in until the ball comes out of my hand? So I think there's certainly in that situation, it has happened before. But no, I didn't specifically see the Capel Dev Peter Kirsten one. But I wasn't because I knew the Courtney Walsh story off the top of my head. I wasn't looking for a lot of the famous non-Mankad stories, because that one is such a incredible one. Swami Nathan says, what factors in a human anatomy yields a bowling action of a certain type? I don't know if there's anything in the human anatomy that says certain bowlers of a certain physical makeup are going to bowl with a certain action. So if you look at Sean Tate and Waqar Younis, I think they both have big twists sort of towards the end, and they're not particularly built like each other, like I would have thought. Shaun Tate's about 7 inches tall. I don't know how tall Wacko is. I've stood next to him. I can't even think. But I think Shaun Tate's probably quite a bit bigger than him, and quite a different kind of athlete than him. If you look at, and it's always easy to do fast bowlers here, but if you look at that sort of, I don't think there's as much to do with that. I think what you will find is that tall bowlers generally bowl slightly shorter because when they bowl fuller, it becomes floaty. Short bowlers generally bowl slightly fuller because they can get more swing. What are some of the other things that you would find? Obviously, with spinners, you're talking the sort of genetic stuff that you're talking about is probably incredibly strong or long fingers. So, if you ever meet Ashley Giles or Monty Panesar, I'm trying to think some other great, some other spinners, their hands are like a foot longer than a normal person's hands. Like Monty Panesar's hands just do not stop, right? And Ashley Giles once ruffled my hair, and it felt like someone was standing on me. Trying to think of, so yeah, big hands is a big one for spinners. Then I think the other thing that you need for spin is either, a very, very strong shoulder, elbow, wrist, probably a combination of all three seems to come in. Flexibility in the wrist, the ability to rotate your wrist stronger. Things like having hard skin on your fingers, or skin that doesn't blister or pop, or if it does, it then hardens up again straight away, would be quite handy to know for spinners. Pace bowlers, what you're looking for is, and I'm pretty sure that, this is fairly well known, but you want, fast twitch muscle fibers. But that's for really fast bowlers. I'm not sure if that carries over for fast medium bowlers as much, or certainly medium fast bowlers. So I think that answers your question. But yeah, it's, I don't think there is an ability now to have a look at a type of athlete and say they are definitely going to be able to bowl fast. And I would think with spin bowling, that's even trickier again, the ability to do that. But there is no doubt that, if you're looking for a spin bowler, larger hands are probably a very good place to start. And if you're looking for a fast bowler, then, fast twitch muscle fibers and I don't know how you find those, but those are probably the things that you are looking for there, more than anything else. All right, that is the end of the Patreon. But as I said, we had a couple here, so let's just have a quick ad break here, and then when we return, we'll get to the room here on Wagon Wheel with Jarrod Kimber. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. I'm a test guy, but I understand I live in a T20 world. So I'm still going to chat for hours about the inner workings of wrist positions or make long-form documentaries on Kiwi openers. But I also have to work out how to make that work for the T20 society we live in. Well, actually, I don't do that. That is what Memento does. Its artificial intelligence takes my test-length videos and podcasts and turns them into death hitting in T20. Short, sharp, wearing matching outfits. If you make content and you want to slice it up into individual innings, get Memento. All right, let us get to the questions of the room. What do we have here? Oh, no, just one that I wanted to put in. All right. So Shrikant said, Test cricket has great followership, not viewership. We follow Test ball by ball on the internet, watch highlights, podcasts. How do we monetize all this? Should Kimber pay a cut of his earnings to the ICC? The ICC don't run Test cricket. I'm certainly not going to give them a cut of my earnings, although they could ask for it. But they don't run Test cricket. So that's the most important thing to know. Look, Test cricket is played, 60% of the time, sometimes more than this, during office hours, during school hours, during factory hours, during working hours, during the time that we do things. If you want more people to watch it and go to the grounds, you have to put it during prime time. That's why day-night cricket exists, and it's ridiculous that we are more than a decade in, and I still have to explain that that's why Test cricket has its problems, right? It is very hard for the majority of us to get time off. And I do think that plays a big part of it. I think the followership versus viewership question is something that I pose quite a bit, and I know you have some others. So, did I not put you up? Sorry, Shrikant. That was the first part of your question. You then went on to talk about the interest side of things and the weekdays, which I've already mentioned. One idea I have is ICC and other boards have tie-ups with people like me in final word and grade cricketer. And then what's the last bit here? Oh, no, that was someone else's question. I'll leave your question up here, Shrikant. And thank you for the super chat. So, yes, promotions and everything else. It's very weird. I think there are certainly sports where, well, I'm going to go back actually. So when I first started, I don't know what year this was. It might have been around 2009, 2000. No, I was already in the press box by that stage. Yeah, 2008, something like this. And I was trying to get accreditation as a blogger. And the ECB said I couldn't have accreditation. They were very upset with things that I'd written. And then afterwards, I had a pretty good relationship with Steve Elworthy, former South African player who works for the ECB, now runs Surrey. And I was chatting to him, and they asked me what they could do, and I gave them a plan of how to better market their players and how to speak directly to the bloggers. Because at that stage, cricket blogging was a thing, and there were blogs everywhere, and they were being hounded by these bloggers, and they were coming out from a really defensive viewpoint. And I said, what most people want is just access. Right. What most people want is to know that Jimmy Anderson knows who they are and they've chatted to him one time and they can say on their podcast or their whatever. We are still in a situation where the majority of the social media influencers, the YouTubers, the podcasters don't have access to international players. And I would say that international cricketers do a fraction of the media of other players of that level in other sports around the world. This is a good place to start, Shrikant. Rather than the promotion, the tie-ups with to be fair to myself and final word and grade cricketer, we aren't going to save Test cricket, right? We aren't going to make any more money for Test cricket. But by embracing people like us, you will actually encourage other people to do what we have done, to the point at which you have a lot more people involved and talking about it. There should be more people talking about cricket. There should be more cricket podcasts. There should be more cricket blogs. There should be more people on social media influencers of cricket, more dealt with cricket and we cricket and all these sorts of things. And if you're not trying to partner with them, right, they're just out there on their own. And I've seen really good cricket podcasts by smaller people that just fade away. They just don't go anywhere. And part of the reason is they can't break through to the next level because they're not encouraged. That is a huge thing. But I would go back to the fact that I'm not sure that's how you make more money off this thing. But what I do believe is that day-night cricket is the best way of making more money off it straight away. And a lot more money should be invested in making that work. But the system as it is not particularly set up perfectly. But cricket is a Test cricket specifically is a cultural thing. And I don't think that most cricket boards in the world make the most money out of the cultural element of this. And what I mean is that the two really good sports for this are Test cricket and the NBA, right? The NBA is a cool culture, right? And because of that, you can sell sneakers and all these things that flow off that sport, the kit and everything else. But what Test cricket has specifically is a historical cultural value to a lot of people. And at the moment, the only way that cricket tries to make money out of cricket fans is via pay TV subscriptions and ticket sales. So what are you doing for the rest of the year? What are you trying to do to be able to get these people involved? Why not start to offer other things that they could have? And if you look at it, the vast majority of the cricket boards around the world, they're not actually monetizing anything they do, right? They're just trying to monetize those two things, and they're not trying to build anything else, and then you see something stupid when they think it's easy money, like, the ICC's crypto, the NFTs and everything. Well, that's not going to work. It's going to make you look like an idiot, and it's going to fail. So I do think from that perspective, there are other things they can do, but I just think that cricket needs to open up. I think if I was running the game, obviously not going to happen. If I was running the game, what I would say is, how do we just get more people talking about cricket at all time? And then once we do that, and once we open it up, and once we get more fans, once we get more interesting people coming to the game, right? How do we monetize that? How do we make that into something that doesn't currently exist? And at the moment, I'm not sure what cricket is trying to do other than the three obvious things: advertising, ticket sales, and pay TV, right? Or TV rights, I should say. There has to be more. There has to be more, and it has to be more progressive. And cricket has since I've worked in it, and I don't think it was any different if you go back, has always been this really ring-fenced sport for no reason. Be the sport that doesn't have any fences. See what that does for you. And I promise you then, even if people are still following it more than they are viewing it, you will make more money. And that's all formats of cricket. Kyle said, how accurate are international paces? Are they usually aiming for 1 foot square, bigger target, smaller? They would say they're aiming for a 1 foot square, but we have, there's some really good pitch maps where you can have a look at this. It's probably meter by meter is probably pushing it a little bit. It's maybe more 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. But if you have a look, there's a famous Nathan Lyon pitch map. And you can see that he was probably trying to bowl roughly on the same spot every ball because I think it was at Bangalore. He was getting great spin coming back in, and he was trying to hit the same spot over and over again. And his overall pitch map is probably about 1 meter or 1 meter by 1.5 meters. If you allow for the fact that occasionally he was maybe trying to float one up a little bit more, or occasionally trying to go slightly wider, you can bring that down to, I think his base overall area is about 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. So about 1 foot square. So pace bowlers should be quite a bit bigger than that. And I would assume it's probably around 50 by 50. Now, for that, you are talking Vernon Philander, Mohammad Abbas, Glenn McGrath, Jimmy Anderson type bowlers. And then it just gets wider and wider. If Kyle, I don't know if you've ever played the old cricket games, but the bowling average would make the circle as low as possible. It's not quite like that, but it's a bit like that you have a bigger one. But yeah, the idea that you can hit a Yorker every ball when at best you're 50 centimeters. If you think of, so what's that, a meter and 50 centimeters, and that's a really accurate bowler. So a normal bowler might be 60 centimeters or 65 centimeters, right? You're not hitting your Yorker every ball, especially with the batter moving around in their crease, and especially with the fact that they can scoop up. So yeah, hitting a Yorker every ball would be absolutely impossible. No bowler will ever be able to do it. There's a reason why modern bowlers don't bowl as many Yorkers. And it's not because they don't know how, it's because it doesn't work, because batters have become very good at even making that small area even longer by the shots they play, the bats they now have, and their ability to move around in the crease. Another super chat. Thank you. Can T20 make cricket a global sport? Cricket is a global sport. It's the second most Googled sport in the world. What you're saying is, and as you follow on to say, can it be 20 to 25 strong teams competing in the T20 World Cup? Cricket has become so boring with the same nations playing. I don't know. I'm not sure if I agree with that statement, but I understand your point. Football is rising in popularity very fast in India. Well, yeah, Kolkata. But yeah, football, cricket doesn't have to be bigger than football. And I do think that some people, if cricket was the second biggest sport in like 20 countries, we would be doing great. If it was in the top 5 of like 50 countries, it would be spectacular, right? That's kind of where basketball is, right? And basketball has a more global reach, but doesn't quite have the fanaticism of cricket in certain markets, and especially important markets like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. So yeah, I think from that perspective, a T20 cricket can certainly help. I think it already has. It's certainly, I think if you look at women's cricket, that's the one that is the most obvious, and look how quickly it's grown. We now have more good cricket teams than we've ever had before. It's really interesting that you sent this message now, because West Indies just missed out on a World Cup. So it's already happening, right? The best teams are no longer just automatic the way than they used to be. And what we are seeing is now it's more a professional game. The teams with money are rising to the top, but that also means that, I don't know, Japan or the USA might be other teams that might come in. Germany might come in, and because of the professionalism and the way that you can monetize sports in those countries, you might be able to do something else there. So I do think from that point of view, we're already getting there. But this is the strongest that cricket has ever been. And T20 has played a part in that, and I think it will continue to play a part. Sorry, this is the strongest that cricket has ever been through the first 16 or 18 teams. I mean, you could say further than that, but I don't know. You need to talk to someone like Peter Delapenna or Andrew Nixon to tell you the full story. But of the teams I've seen, I mean, that last World Cup qualifiers, the quality there, we've never seen anything like that. And a good portion of that comes from the growth of T20 cricket. Who was that? That was RR. George Devine says, I just said that because it was Divine. How much have you drawn from John Boyce? If you could do a 3-hour YouTube documentary like his one on the Seattle Mariners, what would the topic be? Yeah, I mean, I came to this before I knew what John Boyce was. So my original thing was, how can we make my writing a YouTube video, right? Rather than just sitting here talking. I mean, this is great for the podcast, obviously, but I didn't want every video to be like this. And we already had the visual side of it. What we didn't really understand is, and I am a documentary maker, so I was a documentary maker before John Boyce. So and I always wanted to use animation. If you go back to the Two Chucks things that we did originally, you'll see that a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now is like an extension of that stuff. What John Boyce allowed me to do, and if you haven't gone to his channel, I mean, it's a brilliant channel. I was watching the Bob Emergency today because I was trying to show something to a friend. But what I learned from him is that there are ways of telling this. If the story is strong enough, here's the best way to put it. If the story is strong enough and you put the effort in, then the graphics do not have to be. You don't have to have footage of cricketers. You don't have to have moving images on the screen. What you really need to do is just make sure you have a great story and a visual aesthetic. And if you have a look at the stuff that we've done, we've really done that. And that allowed me to go from 2-minute videos. If you look at the original videos we made, I think on this channel, they were really, really quick and whatever. And if you look at the Neil Wagner one, that is a really John Boyce inspired thing. Although I was probably more inspired by John Boyce when I wrote it. And when we made it, it was probably more a combination of what we had done before rather than just John Boyce. But the idea was to be able to make the Neil Wagner video. We just wanted to see if we could make a 20-minute video. The 3-hour YouTube documentary, I just couldn't do that with the team that we have at the moment. But in the future, I'm a documentary maker and I do want to get back to those sorts of things. I suppose we can say this now, but tomorrow we are dropping the first chapter of our Shane Warne documentary, which is about all the spinners who came after Shane Warne. It's called In the Shadow of Shane Warne. I feel like I just said this phrase Shane Warne a lot. So that will be out very, very, very soon. And I don't think that's particularly John Boyce inspired, but at the same time, I wonder if I would have got there as quickly and I would have tried as many things. I really like oh my God, the baseball one. There's a really cool animated baseball channel that I really liked. And I looked at a lot of different video essays outside of John Boyce. What John Boyce did was open it up. And also because I think he thinks in a similar way to me and probably has a similar kind of skills that I have, editing and all those sorts of things. I think it really did allow for us to work that out. And the quality of his videos is still better than the quality of my videos. And I'd love to get to that point. And he obviously has a lot more funding than I do, although he's very good at cutting corners as well. But yeah, if I had a 3-hour documentary, I suppose it will be the video that we make on the 50 greatest batters of all time. I suppose that is what it is eventually going to be. Will be a 3-hour documentary. We'd love to do something on the bowlers. We'd love to do something on the 50 greatest cricketers of all time at a certain point. There are other projects that I want to do. I still want to do the 4 leg spinners and their life story from South Africa. Aubrey Faulkner and friends. Those are the ones off the top of my head. But yeah, it's probably what we're looking at doing now into the future is multimedia projects. So, when me and Cheyenne and Abhishek are working on the 50 greatest batters, then that will be a book, but it will also be probably 2 or 3 different podcast series, if we're being honest, and a YouTube video, right? And that's what we're looking at doing now, because we don't have the backing that John Boyce has. We don't have that financial backing. But the person who really, the people that really got me, and I think they were called chalkboard football or whiteboard football, but they were the ones that I think Arya, who's the reason I'm on YouTube at all, he sent me that to show me something else. But when he sent me the video, I was like, can we do something like this? And Arya's like, yeah, we can do this level of animation for you really easily. That was the person that really changed everything, because at that stage I realized how much of my writing we could make visual, and that's really what I wanted to do. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the super chat. Who's this one? Arsalan says, weird question. Why is it that we see fewer white players in the NBA? This is really, really interesting. So there is a height and athleticism part of this, which is mentioned quite a bit when you have a look at the comments. People have already answered you saying those two things. They certainly play a part. And there is no doubt that the kind of springy athlete that the NBA was looking for was more commonly found in black players traditionally. We now know through Larry Bird and Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic that there are other forms of athleticism that basketball was completely overlooking. And if you listen to Larry Bird, he used to say, you don't actually have to jump to your full height very often in basketball. So only getting people who can go to their full height doesn't actually help. And the other thing is that there is a racial bias in the other way in basketball that, and it really happens a lot in American sports, where a lot of the guys who are really good basketballers who are white in America grow up in areas where there aren't a lot of black people around. And so they almost live in this, white basketball zone where they're not constantly being compared to black players who maybe do run faster or do jump higher or just look like they do, right? All these things really matter. So that's one part of it. The other one is that generally, and Daryl Morey talks about this in a Michael Lewis book, The Undoing Project. I don't have it here, or whatever it's called. I forget the name of the book. But he talks about how when Steph Curry came along, the NBA was so specific with its drafting that they started seeing people drafting 6'3" guys who are mixed race, white and black. That's how specific it gets. And the NFL's one is the one that has always been the most interesting to me. Of when you go back historically, there are so many different positions on an NFL field where people, if you're white, you will be moved out of that position at a young age to play a different white person position. And the same with a black player who shows skills in a white person's position when we move back. These biases are there, and it's, the way that we do things. The other big difference, of course, has been that basketball, despite being a global game, they looked down on the European style because they said it wasn't NBA style. Again, that looks ridiculous now that probably 2 of the 3 best players, 3 of the best players in the league are probably all European, but 2 of them are white European players. It now looks completely ridiculous. And it never made any sense to me when I would watch the NBA, because the European skills usually had skills that were different to the NBA players, which you would have thought would have added, but it always seemed to be a subtraction. So I do think there was an international bias away from those sorts of players at that stage as well. But there is absolutely no doubt that there is, fast twitch muscle players who are long and lanky. There seems to be for whatever reason, more of those in the black community than there is in the white community or the Asian community. So even when we see Asian basketballers come through, they're quite often athletic in different ways. So to go back to the Daryl Morey one, the Jeremy Lin, one of the reasons he wasn't drafted is because he was Asian. And they didn't think that an Asian person could be athletic. It turns out, and I had always argued this with my basketball friends, where I said, wait a minute. Are we saying Asian people are not athletic because we see them play other sports and they look incredibly athletic? They don't look athletic in the way that basketball currently is looking for athleticism. And Jeremy Lin had an incredibly fast first step, right? And so someone else who is faster than Jeremy Lin cannot stop Jeremy Lin in basketball because he's already passed them on that first step. And they weren't looking for things like that. And this is why, and this comes back to cricket. And, I think it was the question that was asked before about the athleticism. We don't even know all the different athletic traits that we need to be looking for in spinners, right? And we're not even at that level to make those decisions. But I can tell you this in cricket. If you have two spinners of equal talent in a Western country, and one of them is Asian and one of them is white, the Asian one is quite often thought to be the better spinner, right? And if you want to, I was talking about this with someone else recently. If you look at coaching, we still think of coaching in cricket as a white person's job. Most of the coaches in, that are coaching internationally, who are Asian, are spin bowling coaches. Why is that the case? That doesn't make any sense. When you start to break it down, you start to really think about it, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense that, major international teams outside of Asia haven't had Asian head coaches, whereas Asian teams have had head coaches. There's reasons for it. One reason is that Australia and South Africa specifically, and then England on the back end of that, and New Zealand were all ahead of Asia when it came to coaches, right? In the 80s and 90s into early 2000s. But we're into 2020s now, right? It doesn't make sense that you're just hiring people as your spin bowling coaches. So those sorts of prejudices come from what does a coach looks like. And if you go to the AI bots at the moment and you put in what does a cricket coach look like, you're probably going to get back an image of a white middle-aged man, right? 50-year-old man, maybe. That's how these things happen. And it happened in basketball in the same way. And it's it's the way that our brains work. If you want the full explanation of it, it's a really, really interesting thing, but it's the way that our brains work and the way that we clunk information together. So racial stereotypes in general, all those sorts of things come from a very primitive part of our brain that we needed to survive at certain times. But breaking down those sorts of things is generally, the best way forward. Ratchet says, not a question, but an appreciation for the Vinoo Mankad video. Probably my favorite of all the video essays you put out. Just a huge thanks to everyone. We don't know why videos work and why videos don't work. If we knew that, we'd be making millions of dollars on YouTube. Some videos just slip through the cracks. And that Vinoo Mankad was something I think I said, on the podcast that I did with Baram. It's just something I wanted to do for so long. He's such a great cricketer, such an incredible part of our game in so many different ways that I really wanted people to know that this isn't just a guy with a controversial run out attached to his name, that this was a lot more, but also that because we have attached that run out to his name, we get the chance to continue to talk about him. And I don't want his legacy to fail. And that video at the moment, I'm not sure how many views it has on YouTube or, how many reads the article has or whatever, or, all the different social media places we put it. But it was made to help, right? So that if it doesn't have a lot of views now, hopefully in a couple of years, when someone Googles, questions about him, it comes back to that video or the article that we wrote about it or the podcast or whatever that may be, because we want people to continually know about him. So thank you very much. It was when you do something about a topic like that, you have no idea if it's going to be successful or not, or whatever. But what we did know is that we'll, to use a cricket cliche, we left it all on the field with that one. So thank you very much. Who we got here? Nikon says, I put together an all-rounder 11. How would this 11 do across conditions? I think he means Mankad, Surya, Callis, Sobers, Miller, Shakib, Gilchrist, Faulkner, Imran, Beno, Ashwin is 12th, Jadeja. Okay, so Mankad, Surya, we've got Callis at 3, we've got Sobers at 4. Yeah, it's pretty strong, isn't it? Miller, Shakib. Yeah, what are we missing here? What are we missing? Are we missing? Would we put Wasim Akram in? Move Gilchrist up. We'll move Gilchrist or Faulkner up in the order. You could move Faulkner up in the order. I think he's probably a better bat than Gilchrist. I know he doesn't. I mean that in the era and everything that he played, not in overall average. But he was a proper top order player, so you could certainly bat him above. You would drop Benno, and you would bring Wasim in then. So you've got Shakib and Faulkner. So then, if you're worried that one of those was not strong enough, you would bring as a spinner. I mean, if you want, a slightly, but you got Mankad as well. So when you're in Asia, you've got Mankad, a little bit of Jayasuriya, Shakib. It's a bloody good side. I like this. I think you want him. I think you want Wasim in. I mean, peak Imran's pretty quick, but I do think you want Wasim in. Jadeja probably fits in ahead of Shakib, I suppose, now as well. And then you've always got the ability of bringing Ashwin in as a number 11. Oh, no, you've got Ashwin in the side. I just see that now. Sorry, I see the way it was formatted. It looked weird on my screen. It's a really good team. I can't imagine any team of specialists is beating that team. You probably go through their openers pretty quick. But then if you've got a bowl to Benno or Imran at 9 and 10, who did I replace? Or, I mean, come on. Incredible team. Rake says, as a basketball cricket fan, and thank you for the super chat, Rake Jake. I've heard a lot of talk from basketball analysts and fans about the likes of Wilt and how he can't be the GOAT combo because he played against plumbers and firemen. Oh. And then he said, NBA only has 8 teams, etc. And I've heard the same conversation about Bradman and pre-1950s cricket. But there is still a lot more respect for Bradman in cricket than Wilt and Russell in the NBA. Why do you think that is? As a cricket basketball person, I actually want to make a video about this because I've never done it specifically, but I want to explain to people who happen to be cricket and basketball fans why Don Bradman is so much better than Wilt Chamberlain. But the best way of explaining it is that a great player, a great scorer in the NBA should be able to score around 30 points per game. And Wilt Chamberlain's best year was averaging 50 points per game. Phenomenal. Ridiculous. Brilliant. No arguments there. But that was his best year. He's had a lot of years where he was nowhere near that level, right? And he was actually played in teams a lot better when he scored around 30 points a game. Now, his assist ratio goes up at that point. So I do think, things start to change a little bit around that section. But the overall point that I would like to make there is he was not double the next best scorer. Now, rebounds and assists all make these things and block shots all make these things a little bit trickier. But if you just go on scoring, Wilt Chamberlain did not score 60 points a game throughout his entire career and have masses of success. That's what he would have to do to beat Bradman, right? You do get a lot of people who actually say that Bradman played fewer teams than Wilt and Russell, right? Russell is an interesting one because Russell's main skills weren't being tracked. Bill Russell was the best defensive player there probably has ever been in NBA, right? And the thing that he was absolutely the best at was blocking shots, and they weren't even being counted. If I think the best seasons ever of block shots in the NBA are 4 or 5 around that period, Mutombo and Hakeem Olajuwon, those sorts of guys. If Bill Russell over his entire career averaged 10 blocks a game, now you're talking about something else, right? Now you are talking about, especially because we know he's a brilliant rebounder. We know he's a brilliant man-on-man defender. Those things we can tell a little bit more from the footage, and the fact that they won a lot. But again, he doesn't have something where you can look at it and just be instantly like even, the great squash players. I forget his name. Is it Akan, the great squash player, who I think is a really, really interesting one. If you go back to his record, we don't have the ability to look at him in a point basis compared to other players, but we do have the fact that he won over a long period of time. Wilt Chamberlain did not do that. That's why Wilt Chamberlain is not the greatest NBA player of all time. I don't know why so many basketball fans seem to think he is. He just wasn't. He wasn't better than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he wasn't better than Bill Russell in the same period that he played in. And when you break it down statistically, he's nowhere near the level of player that Don Bradman was. And it's really interesting that so many people keep bringing this up because I do think they are fundamentally misunderstanding that Don Bradman over a 20-year period right? And he played over 20 years, even if he didn't play the full 20 years because of the war. But over a 20-year period was twice as good as what we consider great. Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, statistically, are not on that level. Bill Russell's record of championships probably puts him back on that Bradman level. But at the same time, it was a little bit different when you look at the amount of teams that were playing. So it's a little bit different to look at that. But there's just, for me, there's just absolutely no doubt that Wilt Chamberlain is not Donald Bradman. And that's as someone who, I love Wilt Chamberlain. He's fantastic. I love looking at some. So even now, I look at old clips. There was a great podcast on Thinking Basketball recently. I think they might have made another video on Thinking Basketball channel. If you like Wilt Chamberlain, go and look at them. Incredible. I think I did a video where I had some clips of him playing. Absolutely love that side of him. There's no doubt from that perspective. But he wasn't Bradman, and the reason that Bradman is where he is because it is an unassailable record. It doesn't make any sense at all to have a record the way that he did over a 20-year period in that way. And we haven't had many, if any, athletes who have ever been at that level ever before. And he's probably, top 5 athletes of all time, realistically. But that doesn't mean that, he did play against plumbers, right? He did play in an amateur era. He didn't have to play in all the different countries. He wasn't tested in the way that Virat Kohli and Steve Smith were tested. We don't know how he would have gone had he been born in another era, and all those sorts of things. But what we do know is that Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain played at the same time, and you've compared them to Don Bradman. There is no B Don Bradman. There is no tier A and tier B. There is no S tier, and he's so far ahead of everyone else. The next best player was George Headley. George Headley is a fantastic player, or Herbert Sutcliffe. They still average 40 less. There is no one else anywhere near him. And, I don't think Bradman was a particularly nice person. And I, don't care that much. If someone can prove to me that he wasn't as great as he was, I will listen to that argument. But realistically, there is no argument that proves he wasn't as great as he was. He was absolutely, without doubt, just a different level of athlete than we have ever seen before. A little bit shorter than Wilt Chamberlain, of course. Anyway, great questions. Thank you so much to all the super chats. Oh my God. So much rate Jake on the YouTube screen as well. I love the questions today. And to everyone, I know I've said this a lot, but if you're not already following the Jarrod Kimber podcast YouTube channel, you really do need to get over there and do that, because we will eventually be moving over there. I would say by the start of the World Cup, but thank you to everyone for coming over here and doing what you're doing. And I will see you again next time on the, what do we call this one? We'll call this one Wagon Wheel. As I said, keep an eye out for the Shane Warne stuff. It's a really cool series. I originally tried to make it in one video, and then I realized I'd written about 10,000 words. Great. It's a topic. It's a topic I've always wanted to write a book on. This isn't the book version of that, but the stories of the individual players that were around when Warne was around and then came after, and what happened to them in their treatment. I just think there's so many fascinating players like Bryce McGain or Bo Casson on their own. Like book-worthy topics, and Brad Hogg, and what happened to Stuart McGill. And that doesn't include Jason Krejci playing perhaps the 2 stupidest test matches of all time. So it's worth checking out, even if you're like, oh, I don't want to hear about old Australian spinners. No, you don't. But you do want to hear about these stories because they are absolutely fantastic. But again, thank you to everyone, and we'll see you again next time.
Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, people would ask my dad if he wanted me to be Viv Richards, and he always said no, he wanted me to be Boycott, because apparently he liked boring things. But anyway, it turned out I could be neither. But thanks to Bodyline t-shirts, I can wear clothes showing both players. The Boycott Stick of Rhubarb is one of my favorite t-shirts. I really like the design. And it's not the only one I love. There's also a WG Grace one where he's in a pedalo, which is a part of my everyday wardrobe now. But there are heaps of other cool shirts on this site, and you can search for them by nations or type and they seem to add to them all the time. I'm a big fan of the Court Marsh Bold Lily in the Australian collection, and there's also a lovely Morning Everyone in honour of Richie Benaud's great greeting. The English area has the Fast Leg Theory shirt, which I think is a ripper. There's a couple of great West Indian ones I love, including this simple Viv Richards design, and a couple of Capel Dev t-shirts in the Indian section that I simply must have. I'm not saying that Bodyline t-shirts will have something that you will like, but I will say this: they got me to wear a Jeffrey Boycott inspired t-shirt. And that in itself is a